is the Erectile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Erectile Dysfunction Podcast with Ashton Cohen. I'm Ashton Cohen. I'm joined today by Charley Wininger. Charley is a psychotherapist and one of the leading voices discussing the benefits of MDMA and advocating for its legalization. He's written a great book on the subject entitled Listening to Ecstasy, The Transformative Power of MDMA. Charley, thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you, Ashton, for having me.
I appreciate it. So I wanted to start off here, give people a bit of a background about MDMA, and then we can go into your personal history with it. Tell us about the history of MDMA, like when it was created. Was it legal at one point? Was it made illegal, and why?
Okay, well, it was created by Merck Labs back in 1912, and they didn't know quite what to do with it. They put it on the shelf, and it wasn't taken off the shelf until the 1970s, when a chemist in Northern California named Sasha Shulgin decided to experiment with it by recreating it and giving it to himself, his wife, and his friends. And they realized that this was something quite special. He started giving it to therapists in Northern California in the 1970s. Therapists immediately recognized it after trying it themselves, and of course it was all legal at that point. They recognized that this would be a good drug to give their couples. So they would give their couples, they'd say, here are 2 pills. We call this pill empathy. Go home, take it, and see what happens between the 2 of you. And the couples would come back and report great progress in their relationship. And that's how it was used throughout much of the 1970s. As the 1980s came along, somebody who was enterprising, gave it the name Ecstasy, and realized that it was good for dancing. It's a very, very versatile chemical. And he brought it to Dallas and started giving it away in the nightclubs, and that's where it exploded. And people didn't know about the protocols that we know about now. They didn't know that if you're dancing in a nightclub all night long where it can get hot, your body can overheat, and if you don't adequately hydrate, you can really have a problem. So people started going to the ER. And so the police started getting involved, ambulance drivers and the politicians. And so then they decided to shut it down. And the FDA classified it as a Schedule I drug in 1985, saying it has a high potential for abuse and no medicinal value. Since 1985, and they were starting to do research with it before then, but the research was shut down. So since 1985, a man named Rick Doblin, who you may have heard of, formed an organization called MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, to lobby the government for the permission to do research with MDMA. He had trouble at the beginning, but then realized he knows a way to make such research politically unassailable, namely by proposing that MDMA can possibly heal post-traumatic stress disorder in veterans and in survivors of sexual violence. And so after much pushing, he convinced the FDA to give them permission. They didn't. The federal government didn't give them any money. MAPS raised their own funds, but permission to research this. Now in 2022, this research is in phase 3. So far, the results have been outstanding. What that means is they will give a veteran or a rape survivor, for example, some preparatory sober sessions with a male and female therapist, and then a session with MDMA, and then some more sessions in between, and then MDMA, more sessions in between, and then MDMA 3 times with MDMA over a few months. And you have to understand, these are people who responded, they're at the end of their ropes. These are people, these phase 3 trials, who respond to no other treatment. Antidepressants don't help them. They're desperate. They're crazed with horrible flashbacks, nightmares, making their family life miserable for everyone around them. After these 3 sessions with MDMA, interspersed with therapy sessions, 2/3 of the people in the experimental group no longer met the qualifications for PTSD.
Wow.
Which is an astounding result.
That's unbelievable. Mm-hmm.
And so at the current rate, MDMA will be a legal prescription-only drug within about 2 years' time.
It's unbelievable. So nothing else has worked for some of these veterans and these sexual assault survivors. They've tried every single procedure imaginable, and they start using this MDMA therapy, and 2/3 of them are essentially cured of it or have significant increase in their sort of livelihood and their life, right? Their emotional life.
And their life. 22 veterans a day die in America by their own hand. And that's often, if not always, PTSD related from their traumas, which can lead to alcoholism, drug addiction, etc.
Right.
So this is a very, very important issue. The VA has now started experimenting, giving MDMA to veterans.
That's incredible.
So there's a lot of progress being made, and I don't think it's going to be illegal for too much longer.
What is it about, in terms of the research showing about MDMA that helps these people? Does it unlock something in the brain? What's the sort of chemical reaction that's having?
It's quite uncanny what it does. On MDMA, your body gets flooded with serotonin. Your own serotonin gets released. And serotonin is the feeling good, feeling of safety and well-being hormone, along with oxytocin, which is also a hormone connected with empathy and bonding. So the combination of all your body being flooded with your own serotonin and oxytocin, you have a great feeling of well-being, safety, and bonding. Because of this, what happens is the therapists don't sit there and say, okay, now go back to the time when the mine exploded in your face. No. It emerges naturally because people are feeling, the person feels safe, like they've never felt in their life. Safe, so that the trauma just naturally arises. And what happens is it shifts the person's relationship to the trauma. The best description I heard from somebody who says it's like watching a shark in a tank. So I'm out here like in an aquarium, and the shark is in the tank. It's scary. It's big. It's intimidating, but I'm safe. And having that experience, that visceral experience for that day, alters the person's relationship to the trauma, so that they can have the trauma, and the trauma no longer has them. So that they can then process it and bring meaning to it, and process it with the therapists, and that's what changes everything.
Yeah, that's amazing. When it was made illegal, was it just a matter of people overreacting to other individuals using it as a party substance? So you mentioned it started in the Dallas clubs. That's kind of like the last place I would have thought that it would really take off. It would be somewhere like Dallas in the 1970s. That's pretty interesting.
1980s, yeah.
1980s, yeah. So or was there a more nefarious motive? And I mentioned that because I just seen, I'm not sure if you've seen the show yet, Dope Sick on Hulu. And they go into the Sackler family. And you see how the FDA gave a special, unprecedented label to OxyContin that they never given before, never given since, basically saying that this is less addictive than other opioids. And yeah, this is something. So we have, I think, 500,000 deaths in the last 10 years from opioids. Large part of that is OxyContin. But yeah, they reacted, seems quite swiftly to making MDMA illegal. Do you have any insight onto what that thought process was?
Well, of course, there was no profit motive there because
Right,
people
that's a big one.
I mean, they were just individuals making their own
Right.
MDMA and giving it out as ecstasy. So they weren't lobbying the FDA or the government. It was a political football. The media sensationalizes these stories. Certainly, the overwhelming majority of people you were doing it in Dallas didn't have a problem, but some really did, because we didn't know at the time about the protocols to use, namely hydrating appropriately during the experience, especially if you're dancing in a hot nightclub. So people really did get sick, and the politicians who wanted to make a name for themselves pushed the FDA to do this. And yeah, that's
Yeah.
what happened.
I want to get back to sort of your guidance and your ideas in terms of the right protocols to use beforehand in a second. But first, I want to hear about how you came to be associated with MDMA, what your experience was like, what brought you to it.
Well, I had given it up. I've been what they call a psychonaut, one who uses psychedelics, for the past 50 years. And I had done MDMA a few times in the 90s, didn't know about the protocols myself, and had some bad after effects. But then I got divorced in 92, was single for a while, and I met my second wife, Shelley, in 2000. And Shelley was out of a repressed marriage. Shelley was straight as a board, was straight as an arrow. She didn't, she never so much as finished a joint in her life, okay? But she was out of a repressed marriage. She wanted to spread her wings and expand her horizons. When she found out I was a psychonaut, she said, "I'd like to try ecstasy," which floored me. I didn't expect that from her, but she wanted to. So I decided to find some for her. I had to make sure it was pure. I was concerned about, I was responsible for her well-being, so I wanted to make sure it was pure and measured out right and all that. And I learned about the protocols. And so I decided, okay, what the hell, I'll do it myself with her too as well. So that first experience, I watched her wake up as if from a long sleep, coming to in a way that, I mean, she was, in my mind, special and beautiful to begin with, but it was like she woke up and she was beaming and was euphoric, but completely in control. And I was feeling really good myself. And we spent the day just talking and stroking each other's bodies. It's not really a sexual drug. It's associated with sex a lot. It can be used with sex, but it's more a sensual drug. So, we would enjoy touching each other and kissing, and talking in a deep way. And from then on, there was no stopping her. She really loved it. And I knew that I was responsible for her well-being, so I knew that if you do this too often, it has diminishing returns. So I limited us to 4 or 5 times a year. I always made sure it was pure and measured out correctly. Since then, for the past 20 years, we have done it about 75 times, 4 or 5 times a year or so, a little less than that. And we've never had a bad experience. It has imbued our marriage. We've been together 21 years now, married since 2005. It's imbued our marriage with joy, fun, all these peak experiences. It's like been the icing on our cake.
I've heard from different people, maybe it's a myth, that you shouldn't have sex on it.
Oh, no, I'm not saying you shouldn't have sex. That's a myth.
Okay.
The problem is, permission to speak freely, Ashton?
Yes, please.
Okay. The problem with for men, it can be difficult staying hard.
I see. Okay.
And they might have erectile dysfunction, unless they take a Cialis or something like that. But even then, it might be hard to climax for a man, not for a woman, but for a man, might be very difficult to climax. But we've had sex on it. It can be very, very, very lovely. And what we do is at the end of the roll, we call an MDMA experience a roll, as opposed to a psychedelic trip. It's not hallucinatory, so we call it a roll. At the end of the roll, as we're coming down from this, I smoke a little cannabis, and we have what I can only call sextasy, and that's the so-called climax to our night. And that's how we end the experience, and it's glorious.
How long does the sensation last on ecstasy usually?
It depends whether you boost in the middle of it or not. Often people take half the original dose, like 2 or 3 hours in. If you do that, it will last 6, 7, 8 hours. If you don't do the boost, it will last 4, 5, 6 hours. Okay,
so it's a long-lasting one. How would you describe it? So my only experience with psychedelics were mushrooms, which very interesting experience. It's like a appreciation of nature is how I would sort of describe it. It's almost like 3D plus, right? So I know some of these other like DMT or LSD may take you to a different world, and people describe different dimensions or things of that nature. Whereas with mushrooms, it's like you're in the real world, but it's more enhanced. You're more appreciative. How do you differentiate between the experience of something like mushrooms, LSD, and ecstasy?
Well, you took a mild to moderate dose of mushrooms, because it doesn't sound like you were hallucinating.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I've hallucinated on them.
You're just enough to enhance everything around you, and it is great for being in nature, that's for sure. So visually, it's the same with MDMA. It's actually chemically related to amphetamine. It's not pure just amphetamine. Amphetamine will make you jittery, and it won't give you any of that empathy. But it is related to amphetamines. So there's no hallucinations. You're in control. You have a great feeling of well-being. Visually around you, things are slightly heightened, but not really. Tactile sensation is somewhat heightened. That's why people will like to just stroke their arms or hug and kiss or fall into cuddle puddles with each other. But it's mostly feeling sent outward from the chest. It feels like the sun itself is rising in your heart.
And how does that compare to something like LSD?
Well, LSD is a hallucinogen, so the enhancement of all the senses is much more pronounced, and it's famous for inducing all kinds of visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations. You can really, if you don't know where you are and what you're doing, it can be quite disorienting. That's why with all these substances, MDMA, all these psychedelics, our mantra is set and setting. The mindset you have going in is crucial, and the setting, your surroundings, are crucial to the quality of the experience. So if you're doing it the first time, do it at home. And if you're feeling, horrible that day, don't do it to feel better. That's not what you use MDMA for. You use it to explore enhance what you're feeling and explore what you're feeling and explore your relationship with the person or people that you're with.
So you mentioned set and setting. Do you sort of meditate before you take it? Like what are the protocols, not only in terms of mindset, but in terms of the experience that you're in and doing it in the most safe way possible? What are the protocols that you undergo or that you think are necessary if anybody does this, needs to first do?
Yeah, good question. And I've already mentioned many of them. You have to make sure it's pure. You must
Right.
only use pure MDMA. And something sold to you as ecstasy or Molly may not be pure. Something sold to you as MDMA may not be pure. The way to deal with that is to test it. You can get a test kit inexpensively and legally online, dancesafe.org. Dancesafe, just like it sounds, .org. You can get a testing kit. And it's easy to test. You only buy and only use pure MDMA. And you need a scale so that you can measure it adequately.
What's the measurements that people who start off usually go with? Like what's too far and what's sort of a moderate amount?
Well, let me just finish that other thought that I'm talking about measuring the powder because pressed pills are usually not pure. Rarely they are sometimes, but usually not pure. So we're only using powder. And the appropriate dose, unless you have some kind of medical condition, and maybe you shouldn't do it for certain medical conditions like heart problems. But for somebody in good health, the standard dose is 120 milligrams and a boost of 60 that you take if you want a few hours into the experience.
Who shouldn't take it?
Somebody with epilepsy, somebody with who's pregnant, somebody who has a history of schizophrenia or paranoia, somebody who is bipolar or has a history in their family of bipolar disorder because it can trigger a manic episode, and somebody with heart condition. And I want to say, and please listen carefully now because I don't want people to, I'm always concerned that people are going to get too free with this information and not listen carefully. My wife has a heart condition called coronary artery disease. Actually, her heart is fine, but the arteries around her heart have 6 stents in them, okay? So we were concerned when this happened back in 2006 that her rolling days were done. So we asked an expert, and the expert said, no problem, as long as your heart is okay and you're concerned about the stents and the arteries and your blood pressure and all this, take an extra beta blocker, which Shelley takes every day, an extra one before you roll. She's done that dozens and dozens and dozens of times since, and she's never had so much as a symptom. But I'm not saying I recommend it to your audience if they have any kind of heart condition, but this is Shelley's experience. But people with actual, like who've had a heart attack, for example, or arrhythmia or heart conditions like this should stay away from MDMA.
If you have a someone you know, let's say a friend, and when should you be concerned in terms of when they are going too overboard with this? Is it like when they're doing MDMA to sit at home and watch SportsCenter? Like what's sort of like the you mentioned that 4 or 5 times a year is sort of the optimal ground that you guys like to take it and don't want to for you guys, right?
For us, because obviously you can tell we're a little
Right.
older than you are. So younger people in good health can take it once a month without, as long as they take time to replenish afterwards. It's part of the protocols also, to get a really good night's sleep. I'm 72 years old, so I get a really good night's sleep. I'll sleep for 10, 11, even 12 hours. I wake up feeling great. And also an over-the-counter supplement called 5-HTP, the night of when you go to bed, and the following night too, helps replenish your serotonin. And we eat very well for the next couple of days. So we replenish our system. But getting back to others who are younger than us, which includes just about everyone, I would say that if you limit it to once a month, as long as you follow these protocols, you'd be okay. So if your friend is saying, this was fabulous, I want to be like this all the time, and he's doing it the next weekend and the next weekend, that's a danger sign, because then he or she might be using it to medicate themselves and to numb their pain. And it's usually not an addictive substance, but it does have that potential for abuse.
Okay. And I was looking at, prior to when we started chatting, that this was a study. The death rate for MDMA was 2 to 4 out of 100,000 users, which for comparison's sake, the death rate for smoking is 400 out of 100,000. Excuse me. So death rate for smoking is 400 per 100,000, and alcohol is 50 per 100,000. So it's the data we have shows that something like tobacco or alcohol is significantly more abused than MDMA. And that 2 to 4, I'm assuming, do you think part of that is dehydration and not taking the right protocols?
It's dehydration. It's because we'll drink like a liter of water throughout the day, for example. And if we're going to go dancing, because we like to do that, at a festival or something like that, we'll drink, on a summer day, we'll drink more than that. So either not hydrating enough. Some people go overboard and hydrate too much. This is especially a problem for women.
Oh, really? Okay.
They can like drink like whatever it is, half a gallon of water or something, and when they don't need so much, and that can be a problem. People also mix it with other drugs. The only drug we ever mix it with is cannabis. Sometimes with LSD, if we want to stay home for the night and have and go to Mars for the night. But you should never mix it with alcohol. You should never mix it with another stimulant. You should never mix it with a depressant. It can be or cocaine or anything. That can be quite dangerous.
Right. What's you mentioned you've never had a bad trip on it? Is that right?
Right. Never had a bad experience with MDMA.
If you take all the protocols, you think that it's impossible to have a bad trip, or maybe it's still possible. And if you do have a bad trip, how do you sort of function with that? How long will it last? What's the sort of procedure then?
Well, it's not like having a bad acid trip where you're saying, "Oh my God, make it stop, make it stop."
Okay.
It's like you might feel if you've taken too much, for example, your jaw is going to be very tight, and your eyes might go like that. Like it's called nystagmus. It won't damage your eyes, but it will make you feel a little disoriented. You'll be hyperventilating a bit. That means that you've had too much. It's not gonna. You don't have to panic. It's going to pass. You just need to relax and lie down and maybe listen to some calming music and slowly slow down your breath. If you're having chest pains, oh my God, that call 911. But short of that, you'll be okay, unless, of course, you're dehydrated. So you have to make sure you're adequately hydrated.
So we talked about who shouldn't use it. We talked about your experience with it. Make the case for why it should be legalized. Why should, and you've gone over some of the benefits, but why should people not be concerned that it becomes legalized?
Well, first of all, there's an issue of cognitive liberty. I'm libertarian on this issue, and so I don't think the government has the right to tell you what you can put in your body and what you can't put in your body. That's the political side of this. But as far as the actual benefits go, it is an exceedingly beneficial substance. I call it the chemical of connection. It helps you connect with yourself and your own experience and with the person you're with in a romantic way, if you're with a romantic partner, or to bond with friends. It's famous for that. That friends take it, and where, some people might go to a bar and bond with friends there and drink into the night and have a good experience. With MDMA, you can take it with friends, like in your living room or at a park, and bond with friends, and the conversation can go deeper than ever. And it can be an experience that the two or four or six or eight or 10, we've done it with as many as 40 people that we've chosen and done group experiences with here in Brooklyn, in the park. These experiences are unforgettable, and people keep wanting to stay connected. New friendships are made for years. So it's good on that level. It's also good on just a purely recreational level of dancing with 1,000 others in wild abandon. Some might consider that frivolous, but I believe that play and fun and joy can be healing and transformative experiences. And on the other end of that pendulum or spectrum, besides the dancing the night away, there is actual therapeutic, intentional therapeutic use, to use it with a dedicated person who will sit for you, who's trained, who knows how to sit for you, how to be there for you and guide you through the experience, a trained therapist who can help you deal with early trauma or help you deal with whatever issues you want to deal with and get to a different place. Therapists report, and of course they're doing this work underground, that they can do 6 to 12 months worth of therapy in a day.
Wow.
With MDMA. So all these point to why it should be a legal substance and why it will be a legal substance soon, and I believe stands in America's future as a go-to medicine for all sorts of applications, whether they be for responsible fun, or what I call serious fun, or for therapeutic uses, not only for PTSD. They're experimenting now with autism and people with social anxiety and having good results so far, for addictions and other applications as well. So it has all sorts of applications that we're only beginning to learn about.
Right. And I think another thing you didn't mention was one of the ways I look at it as well is all the prescription drugs that have been made legal, which are benefits are much more, say, tempered probably, and their side effects are significantly worse, and they have a incredible amount of abuse associated with them, and they're legal. And here's something that, and it's been widely reported, the research, the results that MAPS has been getting with soldiers, with sexual assault survivors on this. There doesn't seem to be any conceivable reason why somebody could be against it, at least for the medicinal uses, but also you can make the argument definitely for the recreational use. I mean, if it has these sorts of effects, why shouldn't people be free to take it, right? I mean, try this with... We tried this prohibition, yes, right?
That's right. And prohibition, it doesn't work. They call it a war on drugs. It's really a war on the people who use them. And imagine using a drug, accusing somebody of using it to and abusing it to suppress their symptoms or self-medicate, and treating them with jail. I mean, that's just it's just idiocy. But we have had so many good experiences with MDMA, just Shelley and I, or with groups of people. I found that, Ashton, over time, it started changing me. The effects were cumulative. Like I say, I've done it about 75 times over the past 20 years. And it made me lighter. Shelley will tell you I'm like a heavy dude. Like I spend a lot of time in my head, a lot of time ruminating and having all sorts of worries and frets and all that. But over time, MDMA was speaking to me and saying, Charlie, do you remember that Mark Twain quote that says, in my life I've been beset by multitude of adversities, some of which actually happened? Look at your life, Charlie. You could worry and worry and worry, but you've had an enormously blessed, happy, good life with all the blessings of being in this country. And maybe you should lighten up. And so I started listening to what this MDMA was telling me, and so I decided to write a memoir about it. I called it "Listening to Ecstasy," because I needed to come out of the closet about this and share the wealth of information.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I should also mention the other benefit of it being illegal is people can actually get, as you said, the MDMA, the pure MDMA. I think one of the biggest problems, there's clearly a demand for it that doesn't go away. It's, I was mentioning to you prior that a good percentage of the people, whether they're left, right, center, whatever their political persuasion is, that I know have taken this, and its demand just probably increases every year. It's or at least staying stagnant. And so the problem is they're relying on some drug dealer,
right,
who may have gotten it from someone else, or he may himself have laced it with meth or fentanyl or something of that nature, and that creates excess mortality that could have otherwise been avoided.
That's right.
So I think that
the drug war kills people, Ashton.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of aspects of it have been terribly misguided. Do you know, by the way, are there any countries that make this legal for recreational use as of this moment?
Well, I know Canada just liberalized their laws concerning psychedelics. Portugal also is another country that has very liberal drug laws. I don't know if it's legal in these places or simply decriminalized, so it's not prosecuted. Mm-hmm.
And so they're in stage 3 for the therapeutic process. What do you anticipate in terms of its being approved for therapeutic use, and what timeline do you think where we would start having states in this country, at least decriminalize it or essentially legalize it for non-medical uses?
Well, it's the states, as you know, are often ahead of the federal government with these matters.
Right.
So states are starting, or most municipalities are starting to decriminalize or legalize psilocybin, for example, for magic mushrooms. I don't believe any of them have done the same with MDMA, though I think it's not far behind. The federal government, at the current timeline, by the end of 2023, it should be a prescription medication.
Wow. Okay. That's really soon. Well, yeah, let's see how it goes. I think that we need to, challenge ourselves these conversations and ask ourselves critically about why certain things are illegal and why certain things are. And, I'm all about freedom. So I think that I have some issues with some of the drugs that are more on the abuse side of things, like meth or heroin. I can't bring myself to believe that those could ever be legal. But for the psychedelics, I think that there really is no conceivable reason that they should be. So we'll have to monitor where that goes. Book is called Listening to Ecstasy, The Transformative Power of MDMA. I'll put it over in the show notes. Charlie, thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me on, Ashton. I much appreciate it.
If you enjoyed our show, please click subscribe to stay up to date with our YouTube channel and podcast, and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts so that we can keep delivering guys some great content. Thanks for listening, and we will be back next week. We're going to talk about the issues that really matter. Our country, our economy, the Fed, QE, GDP, BTC, NFTs, AOC, the CCP, Cardi B, Yeezy, Yellow Socks, Iran, Joe Biden's dementia, come on, man, and probably sex robots. We stand for a free and open debate and exchange of ideas. And if you disagree with anything we talk about, you are a racist and no better than Hitler. What? Let's get started.